15 days ago, after a decade of silence, my family reached out to me. I'm a 26-year-old woman who, at the age of 19, decided to cut ties with my family and move away. The reason was the stark difference in how they treated me compared to my twin sister, Ella, who is 16 minutes older than me. For as long as I can remember, my family has always favored Ella, treating her as the golden child while I was often overlooked. Growing up, I excelled in academics, sports, and even in areas where Ella claimed expertise, like art. I wasn't trying to outshine her out of spite. I was desperately seeking the love and affection that my parents so freely gave to her. However, my achievements seemed to have the opposite effect. Instead of earning their praise, it felt like my successes made them resent me more, as if they thought I was intentionally trying to overshadow Ella. My parents supported Ella in every endeavor. They enrolled her in any class she wanted, bought her whatever she asked for, and were always there for her. In contrast, whenever I requested something, I was told not to act entitled or spoiled. When it came time for college, Ella decided to take a gap year, which eventually stretched into 3 years. She never ended up attending college. I, on the other hand, was accepted into a reputable marketing school due to my good grades. I needed financial assistance for tuition, but my parents refused to help, insisting I take out student loans because they didn't feel obligated to support me after I turned 18. Realizing that I would never receive the same love as Ella, I emotionally distanced myself from my family. During college, I rarely visited home and kept communication to a minimum. As graduation approached, I invited my parents to the ceremony, reaching out multiple times through calls and emails, but received no response. It wasn't until after the ceremony that relatives informed me why they hadn't come. My graduation was on the same day as Ella's first day at a local community college art class. Apparently, her first day at age 19 was more important than my college graduation. This was particularly hurtful since the community college was only half an hour from our house, and she was merely attending an art class, not enrolling in a full-time program. That was the breaking point for me. It became clear that my existence didn't matter to them, and maintaining the illusion of a family was more painful than accepting the reality. I decided to cut all ties. I blocked my parents and Ella on all platforms and moved on with my life. Now, 10 years later, they contacted me out of the blue. My father was dying, and his last wish was for me to support my now jobless sister. Despite everything, they reached out not to reconcile or acknowledge the pain they caused, but to ask me to take care of Ella. It felt like a final confirmation that to them, my role was always to serve their favored daughter. This request reopened old wounds. After years of building a life independent of them, their sudden intrusion stirred a mix of emotions: anger, sadness, and a sense of betrayal all over again. I had hoped that time would heal the scars of my childhood, but their message reminded me that some wounds run deep. I find myself at a crossroads. Part of me wants to ignore their request and continue living my life without them. Another part wonders if helping Ella might bring me some closure. However, I can't shake the feeling that once again, I am being asked to sacrifice my well-being for her benefit. It's a painful reminder that, in their eyes, my value has always been measured by what I can do for Ella. As I navigate this complex situation, I'm trying to prioritize my own mental and emotional health. I've come to accept that I may never have the family I've always wanted, and that's okay. What's important now is making choices that are right for me without the shadow of past neglect influencing my decisions. Despite all the evidence showing that I excelled in many areas, my sister Ella always tried to put me down. I believe she knew I was better than her in many respects, which made her insecure. She often acted arrogantly and smugly, and because of that, we never got along. I don't regret blocking her and cutting ties with my family. It was the best decision for my well-being. After distancing myself from them, I faced financial challenges without any support from my parents. I had to worry about paying off my student loans on my own. I took the first job opportunity that came my way and threw myself into work. I was determined to prove that I was capable and didn't need my parents to survive. It was tough in the beginning, but I was fortunate to have amazing friends from school and college who stood by me and offered support whenever I needed it. Over time, things improved significantly. I found myself in a good place both financially and mentally. For the past 2 years, I've been working at a company that produces manufacturing associates. Although I'm not vegan myself, I've become deeply interested in the vegan lifestyle and have studied it extensively. I see it as a booming market with a lot of potential. So for the past few months, I've been considering starting my own business in this field. I've discussed my ideas with a few people who are interested in joining me on this venture. The plan was to develop a solid business model, and once everything was in place and we had secured some investors, I would quit my job to focus on the new business full-time. I was excited about this new chapter and eager to see where it would take me. However, last week I received unexpected news from my family. My father was on his deathbed, and they wanted me to come see him. It had been 7 years since I'd spoken to any of them, so I was surprised they reached out. When I learned that my father had been battling cancer for the past 2 years, I didn't hesitate. I dropped everything and went back home. By the time I arrived, it was clear that it was too late. My father was in grave condition with no hope of recovery. Perhaps in a last attempt to make amends, or maybe just to talk about Ella, they had invited me to visit him one last time. Seeing my father like that in the hospital was overwhelming. I almost broke down. My mother hugged me, and for a moment, all the pain and resentment from the past faded away. I was just a daughter worried about her father. Ella was also at the hospital, but she didn't make any effort to speak to me. She merely glanced my way with a dismissive look and sat in the corner the entire time. My mother spoke to me about my father's condition, but Ella acted as if I wasn't even there. I found her behavior frustrating, but decided not to engage. I still harbored strong feelings of dislike toward her and had no interest in her life. It seemed acceptable to everyone that Ella and I didn't interact. The rest of the family was aware of the strained relationship we had, so they didn't push us to talk. This all happened just a week ago. 2 days after my arrival, my father passed away. Since his passing was anticipated, my mother and sister had already made funeral arrangements. Everything was organized quickly, allowing me to return home sooner than expected. Unfortunately, before my father passed, I was pressured into agreeing to something I really didn't want to do. On the second day of my visit, Ella had gone home because she was exhausted. It was just me and my parents in the hospital room. They began asking me about my work. Thinking it was an innocent conversation, I didn't suspect anything. After all, my father was on his deathbed. I couldn't imagine they had any ulterior motives at such a time. I shared that I had been working at a successful company for the past 2 years and that I was doing well professionally. They listened and congratulated me, which felt surprisingly good. But then the conversation took an unexpected turn. They started telling me about how much Ella was struggling. Apparently, Ella was facing significant challenges. She was unemployed and had been unable to hold down a job for a while. My parents were worried about her future, especially now that my father was nearing the end of his life. They expressed their concern about who would look after Ella once he was gone. Then they dropped the bombshell. They wanted me to help Ella get back on her feet. They asked if I could support her financially and assist her in finding a job. My father's last wish was for me to take care of my sister. I was stunned. After all these years of neglect and favoritism towards Ella, they were now asking me to be responsible for her well-being. I felt a mix of emotions: anger, disbelief, and sadness. It seemed unfair that even in his final moments, my father was prioritizing Ella over me. I had worked so hard to build a life for myself without any support from them, and now they wanted me to divert my efforts to help her. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to refuse outright, to tell them that it wasn't my responsibility to take care of Ella. But another part of me felt guilty. Despite everything, this was my father's dying wish. I was torn between standing my ground and honoring his last request. After the funeral, I returned home feeling conflicted. The situation had reopened old wounds that I thought had healed. I had been so focused on moving forward with my life and starting my own business. And now I was being pulled back into family drama that I had tried so hard to escape. I haven't made a decision yet about what to do. Helping Ella might offer some closure, but it could also drag me back into a toxic relationship that I worked hard to leave behind. I'm trying to weigh the pros and cons, considering both my mental health and the potential impact on my future plans. In the meantime, I'm continuing to work on my business idea. I don't want to lose momentum on something I've been passionate about for so long. I'm also seeking advice from close friends who know the history with my family. Their support has been invaluable, and they're helping me navigate this complicated situation. Ultimately, I need to make a choice that feels right for me. I understand that family obligations can be important, but I also believe that I shouldn't have to sacrifice my well-being for someone who has never shown me kindness or support. It's a difficult position to be in, but I'm hopeful that with time and reflection, I'll find the best path forward. People often talked about how Ella had left community college within the first few months and never bothered to return. She didn't earn a degree, and her grades weren't impressive, even when she was attending school. Because of this, she couldn't explain the gap in her education. In fact, she didn't attend college at all after dropping out, leaving her without any clear direction until she turned 25. At that age, my parents started pressuring her to find a job. Finally, Ella decided to give it a try, but she struggled to stay employed. She couldn't keep a job for more than 5 to 6 months. After a short time, she would return home and tell our parents that she had quit because the job was too demanding and the pay wasn't sufficient. However, this didn't make much sense because our parents were paying her exactly the right amount. The issue was that Ella was taking low-paying jobs since she didn't have a degree, and she wasn't willing to put in the time and effort needed to work hard and advance in her career. None of this made sense to our parents. They tried very hard to explain to Ella that her reasons for quitting jobs wouldn't hold up in the real world. They often argued with her, trying to encourage her to become independent, but she didn't seem to care about her future at all. Ella treated everything very casually and wasn't serious about anything. Whenever our parents tried to talk to her about her situation, she would just dismiss their concerns. Recently, 4 months ago, Ella quit her latest job and has been staying at home with nothing to do ever since. Our parents are very worried about her and asked me to take responsibility for looking after her. This was because after my father passed away, my mother was getting too old and needed to think about her own retirement. My mother was just 2 years away from retiring and couldn't continue to support Ella indefinitely. I felt overwhelmed by everything my parents were saying. My father had been ill, and I didn't want to be the one to add more stress during such a difficult time. We hadn't been in contact for 10 years, and now I was dealing with mixed emotions. I tried to explain to my parents that I was planning to start my own business. It wasn't the right time for me to take on the added responsibility of helping Ella, because starting a business required all my time and money. However, my dad insisted that they had already spent a lot on his health care and medical expenses. He wanted my mother to be comfortable in her retirement, which was his top priority. He believed that I would be the best person to help Ella, so he pressured me into agreeing to support her. He made me promise to put my business plans on hold until Ella became more financially stable. I didn't know how long that would take, but I agreed because I didn't want to disappoint my dying father. Even though Ella had been a burden in the past, looking back, I realized that agreeing to take care of her was a difficult and emotional decision. I wasn't happy about it, but I felt obligated to honor my father's dying wish. My parents also explained that Ella was in a relationship with a guy from school who was working in another city within the same state. She was planning to visit him, but I couldn't figure out how to handle the situation. Now I'm left trying to balance my own dreams of starting a business with the responsibility of supporting my sister. It's a challenging situation, and I'm not sure how to move forward. All I want is for Ella to find her way and become independent, but right now she doesn't seem interested in making changes. My parents are counting on me, and I'm doing my best to navigate this difficult time while managing my own plans for the future. Ella and John were in a long-distance relationship, and it seemed odd to me why they couldn't visit each other more often. It wasn't like Ella had a job to keep her busy, but John did. He could have made time to visit her more frequently. Still, they were doing the long-distance thing, and I knew enough about this guy to realize it wasn't a good idea for her to be involved with him. That night, my parents shared more details with me. They told me that Ella had been talking to John for the past 2 years, and most of their communication had been online. He had only come back to visit her for a couple of weeks during the holidays, which was the only time they got to spend together in person. My parents seemed to think they were meant for each other, but I wasn't convinced. I knew John from school, and let's just say he didn't have the best reputation when it came to relationships. He was known for flirting with any girl he could talk to, and had been caught cheating multiple times by his high school girlfriends. After high school, I hadn't kept up with John, but I heard through friends that he had already been divorced once due to infidelity. This confirmed my doubts about him. I wasn't sure what his issue was, but I didn't trust him and didn't think he was good for Ella. I tried to explain this to my parents, but they didn't seem to share my concerns. They believed Ella was deeply in love with him, and during his visits, they thought the couple looked perfect together. My parents were so convinced that they ignored my warnings. They even asked me to pay for Ella's flight tickets so she could visit John in the coming week. They were worried that after my father passed away, Ella would feel lonely and my mother would be too busy dealing with all the legal formalities. I was also expected to return to work, so they wanted John to be there for Ella. They believed he was the best person to support her during that time. Despite my best efforts to warn my parents about John's character, they were convinced that he and Ella would eventually get married. They even started hinting that I would need to help cover the cost of their wedding in the future. I could see they had made up their minds about him, and it seemed pointless to keep trying to change their opinion. So reluctantly, I agreed to pay for Ella's trip, though I still had a bad feeling about it. After my father passed away, I decided to talk to Ella during the funeral. I pulled her aside and shared everything I knew about John, warning her about his past behavior. I had known John for years, and his reputation as a Casanova was well known. I told her that I didn't think it was a good idea for her to stay involved with him. But just like my parents, Ella brushed off my concerns. She told me that John had changed and that they were truly in love. She was confident he would never cheat on her or do anything to hurt her. She thanked me for worrying about her, but then made it clear that she didn't need me to act like a parent. She said she'd appreciate financial help, but didn't want or need any emotional involvement from me. Her words hurt me and felt pretty harsh. After that conversation, I decided to do exactly as she suggested. My father had only asked me to look after her financially. He never said anything about emotional support. So I decided to keep my distance emotionally and focus on my own life and career. A few days after the funeral, my mother asked me to book the flight tickets for Ella to visit John, and I did what she asked without asking any further questions. After that, I became busy with my work and didn't check in on anyone. I assumed everything was going according to plan until something unexpected happened. Yesterday, I had a surprise visitor. To my shock, it was Ella. She had taken a bus from John's city to mine because she didn't want to go home and felt too embarrassed to call me for help. After traveling for 9 hours, she showed up at my doorstep, exhausted and in tears. As soon as I opened the door, she broke down sobbing uncontrollably. I was completely confused and didn't know what was happening. Through her tears, Ella told me that I had been right all along. She had planned to surprise John by showing up at his place unannounced, but what she found was far from what she expected. When she arrived at his house, she discovered that he had been spending time with another girl. Ella confronted him right away, demanding to know who the other girl was. Instead of apologizing, John coldly told her to mind her own business. Heartbroken and humiliated, Ella realized that everything I had warned her about was true. John hadn't changed at all. She was devastated and now didn't know what to do. She didn't want to face our parents or go back home, so she came to me for help. At that moment, I felt a mixture of emotions. Part of me was angry that she hadn't listened to me sooner, but another part of me felt sorry for her. Regardless of everything, Ella was still my sister, and seeing her in so much pain was hard to witness. I let her in and did my best to comfort her, even though I knew this situation could have been avoided if she had taken my advice. From that point on, I knew I had to set boundaries. I would help her get back on her feet financially, but I couldn't continue to take on the emotional burden of her decisions. I had my own life to manage, and while I cared for her, I needed to keep my focus on my own future as well. John told Ella that they were never exclusive, and that he had the right to do whatever he wanted when he wasn't with her. He said she had no business questioning him about his life when she wasn't around. That comment made Ella furious. In her mind, they had been together for 2 years, and she had been completely loyal to him. She was even thinking about marriage, so hearing him dismiss their relationship like that was incredibly painful. They ended up having a huge argument right there in his hallway. Ella was so angry that in the heat of the moment, she picked up her duffel bag and swung it at him out of frustration. Unfortunately, one of the metal chains on her bag accidentally caught John on his eyebrow, and he started bleeding badly. The sight of all that blood made Ella panic. Scared about what might happen next, she grabbed her things and ran out of the house, heading straight to the bus stop. She didn't even know where she was going, but jumped on the first bus she could find, which happened to be going to my city. Now she's here asking for my help. Ella told me that this whole experience had been a wake-up call for her. She said she was ready to turn her life around, become independent, and finally take responsibility for herself. She also believed that I was the only one who could help her because I had been independent for almost 10 years. She thought I was the perfect person to teach her how to navigate the world and get back on her feet. Not only that, but she knew I was about to start my own business and hoped I might offer her a role, not just as an employee, but as a partner. It was a lot for me to take in, and I needed time to think about everything before agreeing to help her. I asked if John had decided to press charges against her. I made it clear that if he had, I didn't want to get involved. No matter what John had done, it was wrong for Ella to get physically violent with him. and there could be serious legal consequences. Even though she had managed to leave the scene, Joan could still press charges, and she could get into serious trouble. That's when Ella finally told me the full truth. She hadn't completely gotten away from the situation like I thought. Joan had already pressed charges against her, and she had to pay a huge fine as compensation for what she had done. This was why she had come to me for help. She was in deep trouble and didn't know where else to turn. After hearing that, I told her there was no way I was going to help her. I wasn't going to clean up her mess anymore, especially after what she had done. I reminded her that getting physically violent, no matter the situation, wasn't acceptable, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. I told her to go back home because I didn't want to be involved in this any further. Ella was upset by my response and reminded me of the promise I had made to our father before he passed away. He had asked me to take care of her and help her become independent. But I told her that promise didn't matter anymore. It was clear to me that she wasn't going to change no matter how many chances she was given. She had proven that she couldn't make the right choices, and I wasn't willing to sacrifice my own future for her anymore. I explained to her that I was about to start my own business, and there was no way I would let her be a part of it. She was a huge liability, and I didn't trust her to take responsibility or work hard. The most I was willing to do for her was to book her a ticket back home, but after that, she was on her own. I told her I was done with the family drama, and after this, I was going back to having no contact with my family. It had only been a week since she had arrived, and she had already made a massive mistake. None of this would have happened if she had just listened to me when I warned her about John, but she chose to ignore my advice and got herself into this mess. Now I was just irritated with the whole situation. I told her I was going to book her a flight back home, and she could go straight to the airport to wait for her flight. I had a lot of work to catch up on and didn't want her wasting any more of my time. Ella didn't argue with me. She could see that I was already booking her tickets, and there was nothing left to say.